Now we have already discussed that there are two types of blood flow. One is the streamlined blood flow, another is the turbulent blood flow. In streamlined blood flow, the blood layers in the vessel are moving in a concentric fashion and in an orderly manner, whereas in turbulent blood flow the layers are not moving in one direction only, but rather they are moving in different directions, so that will create a lot of resistance and so much pressure is required to make the blood flowing through the vessels. Now in 1883, Reynolds was the first person who try to quantify what are the factors that will convert this streamlined flow into a turbulent flow. So he came up with this equation which is called as the Reynolds Equation, and it states that Reynolds number is equal to V d rho over eta, where V is the mean velocity by which the blood is flowing, d is the vessel diameter, and then rho is the density and eta is the viscosity. That means Reynolds number is directly proportional to the mean velocity by which the blood is moving and the diameter of the vessels, and then it is directly proportional to the density, whereas it is inversely proportional to the viscosity of blood. Now if we apply this equation, then if Reynolds number is from 200 to 400, then turbulence of blood may occur at some points in the circulatory vessel, in the vessels, but that will immediately die out. That means turbulence may occur usually in the initial part of the ejection phase, and that also at the root of the aorta, immediately distal to the aortic or the pulmonary valve, where there is an abrupt dilatation of the vessel lumen. So from 400 to about 2000, the turbulence will occur, and then at 2000 or beyond that, there is always turbulence of blood flow. Now this means that whenever the velocity of blood is very high or the diameter is more and the flow is pulsatile and viscosity is less because it is inversely proportional, so all these factors will increase the likelihood of streamlined blood flow to become the turbulent blood flow. Now then another scientist in 1840 by the name of Poiseuille, who was a French scientist, he devised another formula which is known as the Poiseuille's equation, also called as the Hagen-Poiseuille's equation, because Hagen, who was German, was also working on the same qualities of blood flow, and he put forward the same formula. So afterward it was called as the Hagen-Poiseuille's equation. Now according to this equation, rate of blood flow is directly proportional to the pressure difference or the pressure gradient, and then it is also directly proportional to the fourth power of radius, and that flow is inversely proportional to the viscosity of blood and also to the length of the vessel. This equation was originally designed for the flow of fluid in the different types of channels, but then afterwards it was also applied to the blood vessels for blood flow. Now in this equation, delta P or pressure, and delta P is the pressure difference or pressure gradient, whereas the pi, as you know, is a constant. R raised to the power 4 is the radius of the vessel, whereas eta is the viscosity of the blood, and then L is the length of the vessel. Now R raised to the power 4 is the major factor that will determine the flow of blood to individual tissues, because tissues have got certain mechanism which are called as local blood flow mechanisms. They are controlled by either the local release of local mediators, or they are also influenced by the autonomic nervous system, and this is the major factor by which the tissues will regulate their blood flow. Now, increasing the radius will decrease the resistance, and that will also increase the blood flow. It has also been estimated that about 11% increase in the vessel diameter, 11% increase in the vessel diameter will double the blood flow, and similarly an 11% decrease in the vessel will reduce the blood flow to 1/2. So, since 90% of the resistance occurs in the small arteries and arterioles and the precapillary sphincters, so it is here that the tissues will cause either a dilatation or constriction of these vessels, and that will eventually regulate the blood flow to that particular organ. Now, length usually does not change, but it may change in if the person is fatty or there is an abnormal growth due to any reason, and that will also increase the or rather decrease the flow, and more length, so less blood flow. Another very important factor that regulates the that is involved in the blood flow is the hematocrit, or that is also called as the packed cell volume, which is the proportion of blood that is blood cells. Now, normal value of hematocrit is 42 in males and 38 in females. This means that if we allow the blood to stand, whole blood to stand for some time, then these RBCs will settle down at the lower part of the tube, and 42 means that 42% of the volume of blood is occupied by the RBCs, whereas the 58% of the volume will be occupied by the plasma. So normally this hematocrit is about 42 in males and 38 in females. Normally the viscosity of blood is about 3 times in as compared to water. Normally the blood has about 3 times more viscosity as compared to the water, about 2.7 to be more exact. Now, if the hematocrit increases due to any reason, then the viscosity will also increase, but since it is inversely proportional to the flow, so the flow will decrease in these conditions. The conditions in which the viscosity is increased are polycythemia, in which the number of RBCs is increased immensely above normal value, or whenever there is a condition in which there is increase in the albumin level in the blood, which is called as the hyperalbuminemia. So in these conditions, the viscosity may increase up to about 60 to 70%. That means now the RBCs will occupy about 60 to 70% of the whole column of blood, and then the viscosity may become about 30 times normal in these conditions. In anemia, on the other hand, the viscosity will decrease, and that will increase the blood flow. This is the diagram showing the normal value of hematocrit, which is about, you can see this lower column is occupied by the RBCs, whereas this is the buffy coat layer containing the white blood cells and the platelets, whereas above is the clear or the star colored plasma that contains proteins or the nutrients and other things. In anemia, the hematocrit is much lower. It is, you can see, it is about 20 or 22%. That means now in the lower part of the tube there are RBCs, whereas the rest is occupied by the plasma. And this is a condition of polycythemia in which the RBCs are more than normal. They are about 70% or more than 70%, and then the 30% or slightly less than 30% is plasma. So this is a condition that is seen in polycythemia. Now this is a graph showing the hematocrit. You can see at 42, if it is 42 here, the hematocrit in males, then the viscosity is almost 3 in this diagram. But then if the hematocrit is about 70%, then the viscosity may become 7 or 8 or 10 times than what is normal. Now these are the factors that are affecting the blood flow. Number one is the increase in blood pressure. So every time there is an increase in blood pressure, that will cause not only an increase in the pressure gradient, but that will also distend the blood vessels, and this distension will decrease the resistance, so there is more blood flow in this increased blood pressure conditions. But what happens is that autoregulatory mechanisms that are operating in the peripheral tissues, they will attenuate this high pressure, because this high pressure will increase the blood flow. So this high blood flow is not required in the tissues. So then what will happen, that there will be vasoconstriction, and this vasoconstriction will reduce the blood flow to that particular tissue. And similar happens in a reverse condition. So whenever there is low blood pressure, this low blood pressure will decrease the blood flow to the peripheral tissues, and then the peripheral blood tissues will release vasodilator substances that will cause vasodilation of the peripheral tissues, and that will improve the blood flow to keep it almost to normal value. The second factor involved is the sympathetic stimulation. That is, whenever there is increase in the sympathetic activity, that will constrict the lumen of the vessels, and that will increase the resistance, and so there will be less blood flow. Sympathetic inhibition will have a reverse or opposite action, that is, that will increase the blood flow. Then there are certain hormones like norepinephrine, angiotensin II, vasopressin, and endothelin, that all are vasoconstrictors, so they will reduce the blood flow, and so there will be decreased in the peripheral perfusion. Then in case of passive or isolated vessels, there is that they show marked response to low or high blood pressure. Another definition is critical closing pressure. That is the lowest pressure at which tone in vessel causes vessels to close. That means this is the lowest pressure at which the vessel tone is so strong that it will cause the closure of the vessels. This is the pressure flow relationship in passive blood vascular beds, and you can see this is the normal curve in which the arterial pressure is increasing, and that will cause an increase in the blood flow. But in the presence of sympathetic stimulation, even the pressure is more as compared to normal, so there will be more blood flow, and in case of sympathetic inhibition, the curve is shifted towards the left, and then there will be less blood flow. This is the critical closing pressure. You can see here, for the normal it is here, and then sympathetic inhibition will have a 0 arterial pressure, and whenever there is sympathetic stimulation, the pressure is in this range of 60 millimeter of mercury.